Thank you everybody for coming today. My name's Jeff Olson. I'm the Art Education Director for Royal Talens North America. And as Lauren said, we're going to be talking about Cobra Water-Mixable Oils. I've got a presentation I'm going to share with you, which is going to be kind of the first half of today. So you can kind of sit back and relax and enjoy that. And then after the presentation, I've got a demonstration that I recorded for you that we're going to go through that's going to take us through some of the working properties of the paint so you can see how they perform by themselves, straight out of the tube, mixing with water and mixing with some of the mediums. And then at the end, depending on time, I've got a fun little demo that can show you how they used to make water mixable paints in the 15th century, something that I'll talk about in the presentation as well. So some fun stuff. If you've seen one of my talks on Cobra before, you're going to see a lot of the same information. So there's going to be some review. I always try to throw new stuff in there, though. So there's some new bits and tidbits and images and things to make it fun, even for somebody who's participated in a Cobra workshop with me previously. And of course, the demo has some similar features, but it's got some new stuff as well. So even for somebody who's been following me and following Cobra, there's going to be some new stuff for you here as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. I'm going to put up my presentation first. And Lauren, let me know when that's visible for everybody.
Looks good.
Right, where water meets oil, the art of solvent-free oil painting, because that's what we're talking about, mixing and cleaning with water. The contents are our agenda today in the presentation. We're going to talk about why paint solvent-free in the first place. Why would you want to just abandon your traditional oils for this process? I'm going to give you a brief history of oil painting. Super brief history, but I think it's important to give some context on how we got to this water mixable technology. We're going to define oil paint in general. I'm going to talk a little bit about pigments. Pigments are universal. We use the same pigments in watercolor and acrylic and oil paint, but it's fun to kind of discover some of their origin stories. Then we're going to focus in on the binder, and the binder is what's really important for any type of paint. It's what gives it its working properties. So we'll be looking at the drying oils, which are the binders for oil paints. Then we'll segue into the water mixable oils. So what distinguishes them from traditional oils in terms of their composition? Then I'll share a little bit about the auxiliaries. These are the mediums. So I'll go through some of the most popular ones and the ones that we're going to use today. Then I've got a few tips for you to make it a more enjoyable experience. Then we need to talk about the myths because there is so much misinformation out there about water mixable oils. I'm going to go ahead and take you through some of those commonly shared myths, and we'll debunk them today. Then I added a little thing about reading the tube. There's a lot of important information on the tube itself that can help you make some good decisions as an artist when you're getting ready to paint in the studio. And then a quick summary. Then I'll introduce the demo. We'll have a little break for Q&A after the presentation. So during the presentation, we're just going to kind of cruise through it. So go ahead and type in your questions. And when we get to the end of the presentation, Lauren will feed me some of those questions before we start the demo. And then we'll get the demo and we can kind of go back and forth at that point. All right, so why paint solvent-free in the first place? There are a lot of different reasons that folks come to me with this interest. The first is health. Some folks just have an intolerance for solvents, or their studio environment doesn't allow for the use of solvents. Solvents, especially turpentine, can be really harmful to your health. So health is probably the primary reason people are looking at water mixable paints or solvent-free oil painting. The environment is another. Solvents can be very harmful to the environment. And then peace of mind. It's just a really convenient way to use oils without worrying about solvents, especially if you're traveling or painting on plein air. That season is quickly approaching, right? And traveling with solvents can be a real headache, or worrying about buying somewhere you land can be a problem. So health, environment, peace of mind, those are the primary reasons people are looking at solutions to paint solvent-free. And water mixable is just the easiest, most direct way to achieve that goal. Diving into the history of oil paint. So a lot of us think about oil painting as beginning in the 15th century in Europe. Actually, as recent as 2001, we discovered some very old oil paintings in Afghanistan in the Bamiyan region, which you see pictured here, that date back to the 7th century. Here's an image of where that location is at. I don't know if you remember in 2001, the Taliban, in their infinite wisdom, blew up these monumental sculptures on the side of a mountain of Buddha. Behind them, after that tragedy, we did discover all these caves filled with murals, floor to ceiling, of the life cycle of Buddha. And here's a couple details of them. When they analyzed the paint, it turned out that it was an oil paint. It was a combination of walnut oil and poppy seed oil, two mediums that are still available for artists today as the binder, and then pigment mixed with it. In this particular region, back in the 7th century, it was the Kashan who was the rulers, and they were very much supporters of the arts. This was at the heart of the Silk Road, so goods were going back and forth, east and west. So it could be that artisans traveled to this region and created it, or they just made use of materials that were there. We don't know, but based on the extent and expertise behind the work, we can only make the assumption that there were probably older examples of oil paintings that are yet undiscovered. In the European tradition, there are actually examples of using oil that predate the Renaissance and the early Renaissance. We can look at the 13th century. This is the Tingelstad altarpiece. It's found in Scandinavia and Norway. And it is an example of a painting that was done completely with an oil paint binder. So this predates its use in the Renaissance, where we're used to seeing the innovations that came behind or came with oil painting. So there is a history in the Middle Ages of using oil as a binder in the European tradition. The 15th century, though, is where we really see the birth of oil painting as we know it today. Many of the processes and materials that we still use were introduced by this gentleman, Jan van Eyck, and his brother Hubert, and there were other painters in Flanders that were also using these techniques. And some of the unique things he did that changed oil painting forever to help them achieve this wonderful luminescence that you see here. The first was to polymerize the oil. So that means they heated it up, and that changed it on a molecular level. Its consistency made it thicker, more self-leveling to get that glass-like appearance. They also started using turpentine. Now, there were different types of turpentine around back then. They were more like a resin. They come from pine trees. But this is the time in the 15th century where we see artists start to use turpentine as a solvent and to thin out their paint to make it leaner. And that helped in the layering process. Other types of resins, here we see pine resin being made, were used. This also changed the working property of the oils. It was synthesized into the oil paint. It could make it dry faster, dry slower, really depended. The primary agent for for speeding up the drying time were secatives. Secatives are a type of mineral salt, and artists of this period, like Van Eyck, would add them to it and help the paint oxidize more quickly so that they could do more layers in a shorter amount of time. So these four innovations really changed the way painters handled the material, helped them to achieve what Van Eyck called the beauty of earthly things, this realism. It broadened the tonal range of colors and just changed painting as we know it in the European tradition forever. Here we see a 14th century painting, and this is Frau Angelica. This is Tempera. It's the Descent from the Cross. So this is the type of painting that European artists would have been practiced in, beautiful paintings prior to the use of oils. Then when we see just a century later, a generation later, we get these wonderful examples of oil paintings. This is Descent from the Cross, the same subject by van der Weyden. And when we look at some of the details, it's just incredible the level of realism that they were able to achieve. You see it in the tears here of the Virgin Mary and the blood of Christ. Just really intense realism that brought viewers into the picture in a way that hadn't been achieved before. All right, so that was it for my brief history of oil painting. Now let's get into the making of oil paint itself. Here you see a video of some oil paint being made in our factory in the Netherlands. We manufacture in a little town called Apeldoorn, about an hour outside of Amsterdam by train. Look at that thick, luscious oil paint. It's like going, if you're a kid, to Willy Wonka. It's Willy Wonka's factory for art geeks like me. Here they're doing some tests as they're milling the paint. A lot of the work is still done by hand. There are artisans who are there examining the texture consistency. He's looking at the pigmentation, adding some oil to it. He's going to put it in something called the Hegman scale here, and this helps him to tell how finely the pigment has been ground. They look at it before they send it to the lab to be checked, and there's some of the Cobra study and artists there. So let's look at some of the basic ingredients of oil paint, and this is an oil paint in general. So the primary ingredients, of course, are the coloring agent. We have the pigment. Most coloring agents in artist grade paints are pigments. Some student grade or academic quality paints will have dye-based colors, but we use pigment in Cobra. The binder, a drying oil. So oil paint requires as a binder some type of drying oil, and we'll go over those in more detail here in a second. Other types of ingredients that you can find, extenders or fillers. This is calcium carbonate, type of chalk. So in student grade paints, they'll replace pigment with this, and that makes the paint less expensive. Sometimes it's used to bulken up a paint so that there's more similar consistency in the range. Stabilizers like aluminum stearate can be added in very small amounts. This helps the pigment and the binder stay together, holds it in suspension. Solvents sometimes are used in the manufacture of oil paints, of course, not in water mixable oil paint, but other types of traditional oil paints. Again, this is used to make the paint have a more consistent working property in the line. Resins, we're still using similar resins that were used all the way back in the Renaissance. This is a Venetian turpentine, a type of resin that Van Eyck might have used. And again, this is used to alter the oxidation and the sheen and the consistency of the paint when needed. And then secatives, those same type of drying agents can be added. Some paints are slower drying than others, so some manufacturers will add amounts of secatives to make them more unified. So let's look at pigments. Pigments are a fun story all by themselves. We could talk about them for hours. This is how they arrive to us in the factory. Pigments are just beautiful to see. These pictures and images don't do them justice. It's as if light is coming or emanating out of these sacs of color. We categorize pigments based on their origin. So not their country of origin, but their physical source. So pigments can be organic, meaning their origins are plants or animals. They can be inorganic, which are mineral-based. And they can be synthetic, which means they begin as organic or inorganic and are cooked up. Literally, sometimes it's a matter of heating, and that can change their color and their working properties. Most of the pigments we use today are synthetic. They are stronger, more luminescent, more light fast. But synthetic pigments date back to some of the earliest forms of artist colors, so they have a long history as well. Artists have always been alchemists looking for new ways to perfect their craft. A couple examples. Here's organic, probably the most infamous of the organic pigments. This is the color carmine. That little beetle there is the cochineal beetle. It's indigenous to Central and South America. It breeds on the underside of prickly pear cactus, and it's used to make this beautiful red. It's been used throughout Mesoamerica since the 3rd century. Here we see an example of some Aztec work. It's used in painting and dyes for clothing and masonry coloring agents. Beautiful, beautiful color. When the Spanish invaded, not only did they pilfer the gold, they also took carmine back to Europe. And carmine became one of the most popular colors in the 17th century used by artists. Here we see Rubens using the color carmine in this beautiful image of Samson and Delilah. Wonderful drapery work. A lot of 17th century painting, especially Spanish and Flemish painting, used the color carmine. As we get into the 18th century, we see more examples of it. And I love this painting. This is by Benjamin West. It's The Death of General Wolfe. But this has a kind of a double meaning when we're talking about color. So he used the pigment carmine in the making of this painting. But the redcoats, the British uniforms, they actually dyed their uniforms with carmine. So it's kind of fun coincidence here we see in the painting mimicking life, the color of the redcoats coming from that same source. Today, of course, we have a synthetic version. We're not using the bugs anymore for painting. We have a synthetic version that's much more light, fast. But there is still cochineal that's used in the making of cosmetics. Lipsticks, for example, even food coloring still contain it. So inorganic, this is probably one of the most famous inorganic pigments. This is ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue comes from a semi-precious gemstone, lapis lazuli. We see a lapis quarry here in the inset picture in Afghanistan, where it's mined almost exclusively and has been for centuries. The term ultramarine was given by the Italians, the Venetians specifically. In Italian, it means from over the sea or beyond the sea. So it spoke to the journey the pigment made to get to the studios of artists. Some of the earliest paintings, like those murals we saw in Afghanistan, where the color comes from, used this particular pigment. So that's a lapis blue used in the examples of the earliest known oil painting. When we get to Italy, we see it used a lot, especially in religious iconography. It was used almost exclusively in paintings of the Madonna and Christ. Here we see Giotto using it in this entire ceiling. Lapis is worth about the same as gold by weight then and now. So just think of the investment to paint this entire ceiling using lapis blue. Here we see a wonderful example of the robe of the Virgin done with lapis. The Catholic Church actually mandated that it could only be used for these things, but eventually those rules loosened up and artists started using them in a variety of subjects. And here we see Gainsborough's famous Blue Boy and the wonderful ultramarine blue in his silk tunic. And then synthetic pigments. So I mentioned synthetic pigments have been around. They're actually some of the oldest colors, and this is Egyptian blue. We see a detail in the back of a scarab, and here we see some of the pigment. Egyptian blue was made by synthesizing copper and silicates and a few other ingredients. They would form these little mud cakes or balls and heat them up to almost 900 degrees Celsius, incredible temperature. And they would cook them for several days, sometimes weeks, and out would come this glossy, shiny orb of blue, and they would crush that up into the pigment. Blue was an incredibly important color to the Egyptians. It was symbolic of the afterlife, of the River Nile. We see it throughout tomb painting, in jewelry, in glass making, a whole variety of types of artworks from Egyptian art. It also made its way around the Mediterranean. Here is a fresco, an Etruscan fresco, where we see Egyptian blue being used. It even made it up north into Germany. This is a Romanesque church where Egyptian blue was detected. And we see it in some 16th and 17th century painting too. Here we see an example of it in an Italian painting. And one of the reasons we know it's there, Egyptian blue has this ability to reflect or capture infrared light. So when they x-ray the painting, the Egyptian blue glows compared to the others. This has actually made it of interest to medical radiography today and other things like heat retention or resistance. So scientists today are exploring its ability for medical imaging and new uses. So incredible that a color created centuries ago, dating all the way back to about 3300 BCE, is being used today in technology. All right, so let's switch gears to the binder, the other main ingredient in the paint. A binder, if you look it up in the dictionary, says that it's a liquid substance that hardens through a chemical or physical process. And as I mentioned before, it's the binder that gives the paint its primary working properties. The primary functions of any binder include suspension. So pigments don't dissolve into the binder. They're like sand. If you pour sand into water, like you see here, stir it up, it disperses, but eventually it'll sink back down to the bottom. So a binder needs to suspend or hold that pigment in place, and we call that a suspension. The other thing it needs to do is adhere to something. It needs to have a really great adhesive property. A lot of binders, like gum arabic for watercolor, acrylic binders, are also used as adhesives. When we look at the binders for oil paints, we're looking at the drying oil. And drying oils are a type of vegetable oil, and they're ones that harden or dry to really strong and durable paint film. The way that they do this is through a chemical reaction referred to as oxidation. So where water-based or water-soluble materials have water in them that evaporates out, these particular drying oils are actually absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere. So it's a much slower, longer process to create the paint film compared to other types of binders. The types of drying oils that we use historically and still today, probably the most common is linseed or flaxseed oil. Lin is actually the Old English, Old Norse for flax. Flax is probably one of the most sustainable crops in history and still is today. The flax seeds are pressed to get the oil. The oil has the fastest dry time, if you can believe that, of all the other drying oils, thinking about how slow linseed oil dries, but compared to others, it's relatively fast. It also has the strongest paint film, so when it hardens, it has the most durable surface compared to the other drying oils. The only downside to linseed oil is it can yellow over time, and you see that in some of the lighter colors. You probably noticed it in some historical paintings when you've been at the museum. It can be mitigated, but it's something that you have to watch out for if you're adding a lot of linseed oil back into your paint. Safflower oil is another type of drying oil. It is great for the reason that it's non-yellowing. So it's often added to linseed oil to mitigate yellowing in whites. If you look at the back of your tube of white, sometimes it'll say both linseed and safflower oil. Safflower oil is slower drying than linseed oil, which is why some of your whites take longer to dry. Safflower oil comes from this pretty flower here. It's a type of thistle. And it's been around for centuries as well. It doesn't create quite as durable a paint film, but when mixed with linseed oil, it is totally archival. Walnut oil, an oil that was popular all the way back in the Renaissance. It's still used by artists today. It's used in the manufacture of oil paints. It's an excellent binder, very durable paint film, non-yellowing. Look pretty expensive, not very sustainable crop, but an excellent binder. The only downside to walnut oil is in your studio, sitting in a bottle, if you don't make sure that it's sealed tightly, and some artists even take the step of refrigerating it, it can spoil and it smells like something died. So you'll know if it happens. Once it's mixed into the painting, there's no problem, but it can, left open in your studio for several days, it can rot. And then finally, poppy seed oil. I mentioned poppy seed oil along with walnut oil, found in those examples of the earliest known oil paintings. Poppy seed oil is kind of a lighter drying oil. It's non-yellowing. It's used a lot today, not so much in the binder of paint, but in a lot of varnishes for oil painting. It's also used as a medium. A lot of artists will add it to slow the drying down, and it has some unique working properties that they enjoy. So those are the four primary drying oils that you will see still today available in art supply stores. So now let's switch gears here to water mixable oils. What makes them unique compared to the traditional oils? They have all the ingredients and all the things that, all the characteristics that we just explored, except you can mix them with water. So let's explore that. Water miscible is a term, that's the technical term. Water soluble is often used. It's not technically correct, but it's used a lot. These revolutionary paints have all the characteristics of a traditional oil, but without the need for the harmful solvents. So back to the beginning, right? Painting solvent-free. There are artist quality water mixable oils. They are genuine oil paints. They're formulated with a drying oil binder. So if anybody tells you they're not genuine oil paints, they're incorrect. Unlike traditional oil paint, the binder's been modified so that it can be mixed with water, and we're going to take a dive into that. The additive that's introduced acts as an emulsifier, and that's what allows for the oil to bond with water to form a stable suspension. So let's explore this chemistry. So first, what is an emulsifier? Some of you may be familiar with this term. Some of you, it may be a new term. An emulsifier in paints specifically, a surfactant, is used or is a compound that acts as a stabilizer. It prevents liquids that ordinarily don't mix from separating. It actually comes from this Greek word meaning to milk, and milk is a type of emulsion. So typically we'll have two ingredients like water and oil, and we add a third ingredient that functions as an emulsifier that helps them to bond. This is a common practice in food manufacture. Anything in a bottle or a can, for example, probably has some type of emulsifier in it. If you were to look at it through a microscope, this is what you'd see. You'd see the fat molecule floating in the water, and then the emulsifier attaches itself to that oil and then bonds with the water. And the way that that works is it has two unique ends. One is hydrophilic, the other is lipophilic. Hydrophilic means it's water loving. Lipophilic means it's fat or oil loving. And that unique molecular structure is what allows the emulsifier to perform this magic, make oil and water bond. In the painting world, we refer to these as surfactants. And surfactants are used a lot in the manufacture of paint, not just in water mixable oils. They have different roles. It's a chemical that lowers surface tension, and it's used because some pigments just don't like to play with oil. So there needs to be some type of ingredient to help them stay in suspension. Looking at the diagram, it's very similar to one we just saw. So each molecule contains that hydrophilic and lipophilic component. Here you can see it in both an oil and water emulsion, and in the reverse, the emulsion oil and water reversed, so that you can see the chemistry going back and forth. It actually functions regardless of the dominance, whether oil is dominant or water is dominant. The energy that's happening, or the surface active agent, is used in applications both in cleaning and paint formulations. And this is where a lot of confusion comes up. A lot of folks, and this is actually written down, I've seen it in books, will mix soap with traditional oil paint to make it water mixable. It's conceivable, it will happen. It doesn't make very good paint, but there's this misconception because of that, that water mixable oils have soap in them, and that's not true. What they have is a surfactant, and surfactants can be used in cleaning agents, but they are not detergents themselves. They're commonly used as wetting agents. So I mentioned the absorption of the binder by the pigment. They're also used as dispersants to help the pigment disperse through the binder, and of course as emulsifiers in a water mixable paint. A common one is polysorbate. It's used in a lot of food products. So these are organic materials, synthesized organic materials that are used in the paint making process, even in traditional oils. So some history in emulsifiers in art. This isn't something that just cropped up yesterday. There are a lot of examples. We talked about casein at the beginning of it. So the ancient Egyptians are the first ones to utilize casein paint. It's a type of milk protein, and it contains within it an emulsifier, a naturally occurring emulsifier that allows the animal protein to bond with water. So casein paint, even though it's an animal protein binder, uses water as a vehicle. The other example is tempera paint, and we're going to explore this some more as well. But tempera is egg yolk. Egg yolk is mixed with the pigment, and water is used as the vehicle. And it's because this particular animal protein also has something called lecithin, which is a naturally occurring emulsifier that allows it to mix with water. We have some of these ingredients in our body that are holding the fats and the water all together. So emulsifiers are present everywhere in nature. Tempera grassa is where we see literally the emergence of the first type of water mixable oil. So I mentioned how artists were using tempera and then they transitioned to oil paint. Well, it didn't just happen flipping a coin one to the other. There was a process in between, and it was known as tempera grassa. Tempera grassa means fat tempera. It literally is mixing oil with egg yolk to create a binder and a paint that could be used in a tempera-like technique, kind of verging in oil painting, but water could still be used as the vehicle. It emerged in the 14th century and 15th century, and in text you can find recipes for this. Here's an example of a painting by Bellini, two paintings actually, one done in 1460 and one in 1480. The 1460 is all tempera, so just the egg yolk binder. The 1480 is tempera grassa with the oil combined. And you can see some of the differences in his style as he starts to explore the new medium. And you really see it when you look at the details. So look at the beautiful tempera painting, but look how more refined, smoother the transitions, gradations, and even the richness of the color in the tempera grassa. So this is tempera with oil added. So here we see the first water mixable oil in the European tradition. 20th century oil tempera techniques existed before the manufacture of water mixable oil paints. I found a perfect example in a wonderful book called the Painter's Question and Answer book. It was authored by Frederick Tubbs, who was a famous teacher in New York at the early part of the 20th century. He taught at the Art Students League for years, influenced a whole group of artists, including the Ashcan School. This book is co-authored by some well-known artists, including Thomas Hart Benton, for example. In the back, he gives some examples of making your own water mixable paint, which he called oil tempera technique. He even gives a formula for it. So he says 1 part stand oil, which is a type of linseed oil, 2 parts egg yolk to 3 parts water, and he would use that as a binder and add dry pigment to it to make a water mixable paint. Use water as the vehicle. He also uses it or describes using it as a medium that could be added to an existing paint and then use water as the vehicle. So here we see precedent in the 20th century where artists are creating water mixable oils using the tempera grassa technique. All right, so let's switch gears and look at some of the auxiliaries. Now that we've kind of got the full story on water mixable oils, what can we do or why would we want to use a medium with the paint? The paint works great straight out of the tube. You can add water to it if needed. You don't need to add anything to it. It's great, real direct painter's paint. But there are some auxiliaries that are manufactured that will adapt the consistency, transparency, and drying time and the finish of the painting. And so let's explore a few of them of the auxiliaries. Here's a list of all of the auxiliaries that are available. I'm going to be using the painting paste and the painting medium today in the demo. There's also a quick dry medium that's really popular. We also have a thinner that's really becoming popular. That's relatively new. There's also a safflower oil and a linseed oil that can be used to make your own paint, a brush cleaner, and then a medium mix, which will turn your traditional oils into a water mixable oil. A little deeper dive on the solvent-free thinner. Its real feature is that it makes the paint thinner or leaner, more fluid, without adding water. And why would you want to do that? When you add water, as you'll see in the demo, it does change the consistency of the paint, mats it out a little bit. Using this solvent-free thinner, it behaves more like a traditional oil with something like turpentine or mineral spirits. So you get that same type of lean layer. So this is really great for underpaintings. It also speeds up the drying time a little bit. So that's really nice. It makes it tack up really quickly. And you can paint over it in a short amount of time. So it's a really popular tool with a lot of plein air artists. Here you can see all of the different features of the paint. Again, makes the paint thinner, less short-term color change compared to mixing with water. You'll see when you add water to a water mixable paint, there's a slight color shift. It goes away. That's the emulsion taking place, but you don't get that with the thinner. Painting medium, which I'm going to demonstrate today, probably the most commonly used and popular of the mediums. This is a colorless medium. You can see it's kind of got that amber look of the oil itself. It allows the paint to be spread out more easily. It loosens it up. I like adding just a little bit on my brush to the color when I'm painting. It loosens the paint up really makes it fun and easy to push the paint around. It will make the paint level out a little bit. It becomes less distinct, your brush strokes, and I'll show you what that looks like when we do the demo. The main things that it does is extend the paint so you get more paint. It makes it more fluid, increases the gloss also, and it will increase the transparency, say if you have an opaque pigment. It can be thinned with water in any ratio. That makes the paint fatter when you add it to it because you're adding more oil. And then I mentioned some of those others. It doesn't influence the drying time, and it will increase the durability of the paint film too. And that's true of any medium that has linseed oil. The more you add, the more durable the paint film gets. The quick dry medium does all of the same things that the painting medium does, with the addition of reducing the drying time. So it has some ingredients, a as well as some synthetic resins, type of alkyd resin, that makes the paint oxidize more quickly, about 20 to 40% faster. It will shorten the drying time. Again, an excellent one for plein air painting or anyone who's doing layering techniques. The painting paste is one of my favorites. We like to talk about it as being paint without pigment. It's got the same consistency of the paint itself, so it's a great way to extend the color and the transparency of the paint without losing that impasto feel. So it's a wonderful material to use. I think it also loosens the paint up a little bit while maintaining the brush stroke. And then finally, the medium mix today. I wanted to share this one with you. So let's say you've got an investment of traditional oils and you want to be able to integrate them. I'm going to show you a couple ways to do that, and this is one of them. You just add the medium mix to that traditional oil in a 1-to-1 ratio, and then you can add water to it. One thing that's really important about it is you must add water. It seems, of course I'm going to add water. That's why I'm adding it to the paint to begin with. But you need the water to complete the emulsion process. If you don't, and just let it sit, the paint will get kind of gummy. So when you add the medium mix to a paint, you need to be doing it with the intention that you're going to be adding water as well. All right, a few painting tips. When using mediums, moderation is best. So if it's the first time that you're using a particular medium, just try it out in small amounts to see what it does to the paint, how it changes its handling before you start adding a lot of it into the process. You can combine water mixable oils and auxiliaries with traditional oil paints. So these are intermixable. You can use Cobra with Rembrandt. You can use Cobra with Gamblin. You can use Cobra with Michael Harding, Old Hall, whatever brand you're using. Cobra is an artist professional grade oil paint. It can be mixed with any traditional oil paints. And if you maintain this 4-to-1 ratio of the paint, 4 parts Cobra to 1 part traditional oil, it'll maintain its water miscibility. I've been able to fudge this. I've gotten up to 2 parts Cobra, 1 part traditional oil. I'm going to show this in the demonstration. And it mixes with water still. So there's a wonderful feature of the paint. When you're mixing the paint with water, the recommendation is not to exceed a 1-to-1 ratio with water, so equal parts paint and water. If you want your paint to be more fluid than that, there's a couple options. One, you can use the thinner. That makes the paint, and you can mix as much of the thinner as you want into it, so you can make it really fluid there. Or you can take a painting medium and mix it 1-to-1 with water, and then add a small amount of paint to that and get a very fluid wash-like surface. The surfaces for water mixable oils, the recommended are universal or acrylic primed surfaces. You want to stay away from oil primed canvases. If you're only using the paint straight out of the tube, there really isn't an issue. But when you start introducing water into the paint, an oil primed surface is going to make that water bead up, and it's going to affect the drying time, and it can create some other problems as well. 90% of the canvases that are out there are universal or acrylic primed. So the vast majority of them are safe to use with Cobra, and they're all easily marked or labeled with that feature. And then finally, I get asked about what type of brushes. The ideal brushes for Cobra are synthetic or synthetic blends, and that's because we're using water. And that's the recommendation when you're using, for example, like acrylic paints, where you want to have a brush that's going to stand up to that water usage. I use bristle brushes with some of my Cobras without any problems. It's all about brush maintenance too. I don't leave my brushes sitting in the water. I make sure I clean them well at the end of every painting session. So there are ways to use your favorite brushes with Cobra. It's really about maintenance and some common sense rules in the studio. Couple things on reading the tube. We're almost there, you guys. Thanks for bearing with me. But here's some really important practical information, not only for Cobra, but for other types of paint too. So they all have their color name, but often these color names are proprietary, meaning they're the only, the manufacturer has made it up and it's not something that's universal to other manufacturers. So there's some other things that you can look at the paint to help you determine what this color is and how to understand it better. The color code, this is 535 for this particular color. This is also a proprietary number for Royal Talens. 535 will refer to this particular color regardless of the medium. So if you have an acrylic paint by Royal Talens, it says 535, it's the same color. The next thing is the opacity. So that little square there. There are 4 options. If it's black, like you see in the tube here, that means it's an opaque color. It goes from opaque to semi-opaque to semi-transparent, all the way to that empty square, which is completely transparent. And you can see the examples of how that plays out. So if you like to do a lot of glazing techniques, transparent techniques, you want to look for paints that are already transparent or semi-transparent. If you want more opaque, lots of coverage, opaque pigments or semi-opaque pigments are going to work better for you. So a nice key there. For artist grade materials, you're also hoping that they're going to be archival, right? That they're going to stand the test of time. These plus signs, you see 3 of them here, they stand for the light fast quality of it. Here it's excellent. So that's the highest light fast rating, 100 plus years in a museum like condition. So you can see 2+ signs on some colors. That's a good rating. A 1+ is only fair. You'll see that more academic qualities. And if there's a 0 or no indication of light fastness, that means it's probably fugitive, which means under 10 years. A lot of dye-based colors are fugitive. Series number. In artist grade quality paints, you'll see multiple series number from 1 to 5 to 8 to 10, depending on the type of brand. There are 4 in Cobra. And that refers to the type of pigment that's used, the exclusive nature of the pigment. The higher the number, the more expensive the pigment, the more expensive the tube of paint. Not that quality is any different, just the more expensive pigment. Next, you have the color index number. Now, I mentioned how the names can sometimes be proprietary. This is where you can differentiate one brand from another. Looking at it closer, you can see it there, PB35. So that means pigment blue 35. So it designates this particular color, this King's blue pigment. Now, it could be PR for pigment red, it could be PY for pigment yellow, and then the number will stand for the specific color. So if you got a tube of Cobra and a tube of Artisan, for example, another water mixable brand, or Holbein, another water mixable brand, and you wanted to match the color, they were out of your favorite color, you would look at this pigment information, the color index number, and that would help you get the same color. All right, on to the myths before we finish up and get into the demo itself. So paints contain water. Water mixable oils contain water. I hear this all the time. That's absolutely false. There's no water in the paint. The only water that is present is what you add to it. The paint itself does not contain water. Contains soap or detergent. So that's that misunderstanding of what a surfactant is. That's false. There's no soap or detergents in the paint, and I don't recommend adding it. That they're not a true oil paint. That is false. They're absolutely a true oil paint. The addition of an emulsifier or surfactant does not change that fact. They dry faster than traditional oils because you add water. That is false. Solvents like turpentine actually evaporate much quicker than oil. These do not dry any faster than a traditional oil does. That they cannot be mixed with traditional oils. We already debunked that. That's false. You can mix Cobra with any traditional oil. You could paint with it like a traditional oil. You could add a solvent to it if you wanted to. But it is absolutely safe to mix with a traditional oil. A lot of folks think that because you add water to it that they're going to behave like an acrylic, and that's false. They do not perform like acrylics. The binder is completely different. Acrylics dry very quickly through the process of evaporation. These are true oil paints. They dry through oxidation, a much slower process. That they could be mixed with acrylics. That is false. Now, there's some competing thoughts on this. We do not recommend it. You certainly can put down an acrylic underpainting, and when that's dry, 24 to 72 hours, you can paint oil over the top of it. No problems there. You cannot paint acrylics over the top of an oil painting that's dried. And we don't recommend that you mix acrylics and water mixable oils like Cobra directly with each other on the palette and paint with them. You could do it. You could mix the two together and brush them on the surface. But because of the difference in the way that they dry, that could compromise the integrity of the paint film at a later date. So we don't recommend it. There are some artists I know that are doing this technique, and there are some manufacturers that say it's okay, but we do not recommend mixing the two together on your palette. Some folks think they have less pigment in them, and that's false. And that really comes from two different sources. One, some of the first manufactured water mixable oils back in the 70s were made for students. They didn't have as much pigment. Today, there are artist quality water mixable oil paints. The other is that there's an existence of this emulsifying agent within the binder, and that means there's less room for pigment. That's false. There are a lot of things that are added to traditional oils as well as the binder that don't reduce the amount of pigment. So there's lots and lots of color in these paints. That they're not archival for some reason, that because we add water to it, somehow that's going to mess up the archivalness. When you add water to water mixable oil paints, it evaporates quickly. The longest it would take would be 72 hours, and what you're left with is a linseed oil paint film. So the water does not compromise the overall integrity or the archivalness of the paint. Water mixables, as a summary here, are true oil paints. The presence of an emulsifier or surfactant doesn't negate their classification as an oil paint. Traditional oil paints can contain surfactants, solvents, stabilizers, preservatives, so they can have a lot of other things in them as well. They're still traditional oil paints. The definition of an oil paint is defined by its primary binder, a drawing oil, such as linseed oil that you find most commonly today. Additional materials or synthesis of the oil, making oil into a stand oil, for example, or purifying it, does not change its identity as oil. Artists have always modified their paint. Historically, as we talked about earlier on in the presentation with Van Eyck, artists are adding resins and dryers and waxes and alkyds, as well as synthesizing the binder to alter the working properties of paint. It's been happening since the beginning. These modifications do not change the fundamental classification of the medium as oil. And that's something to remember. We don't look at a Van Eyck and say, well, that's not an oil paint because he added a cicative or he polymerized the oil. Of course, it's an oil paint. That's the drying oil binder, and that's how we define it. All right, so that's it for the presentation. Just a quick preview. Again, the sample kit, which we introduced at the beginning too. Colors may vary. So you got these colors. They do not specific. You don't have to use them specifically for this demo. Please do. I've used a couple different colors when I'm doing the actual demo here today. You can use any color you want to if you've got some other for the demo. These are great. Naples Yellow Deep, Primary Magenta, Phthalo Turquoise Blue. I really like this Primary Magenta. You have an ampersand gesso board, excellent surface for painting with water mixable oils. We got an 8 by 8 inch board. And then the activity itself, what we're going to do today, we're going to explore the water miscibility of paint. We're going to look at it firsthand. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and we're going to mix it with a traditional oil. Then we're going to do some handling comparisons, really look at how the water mixable oil handles with water and with mediums, and then do some blending and layering, some basic techniques to show you how the paint performs. All right, so that brings us to the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share here for a minute so I can see everybody. How'd we do?
Great. We do have some good questions.
Excellent, excellent. Let's go ahead and address those before we jump into the demo.
Awesome. So, Lisa was asking, are you able to use these with a encaustic painting?
So can you use these with encaustic painting? The answer is yes. So the way that I've used traditional oils with encaustic painting, I will heat up my wax on my hot plate, and then I will add oil paint as the coloring agent. So adding oil paint directly into the hot wax. That's how I've used it in the past. If you're using it that way, then yes, you could use the Cobra. Remember, there's no water in the paint except what I would add to it. So Cobra straight out of the tube into the hot wax, you could mix in and use that as your coloring agent for your encaustic painting.
Awesome. Cool. Next one is Celio's asking, sometimes when I open the Cobra water soluble paint tube and squeeze some paint, a lot of oil comes out with the paint. How can I avoid that?
Sure, sure. So what that is, so that oil that you see come out of the tube when you first open it, we refer to that as oil shed. And it happens a lot in professional paints. So we mix the binder and the pigment together. And remember I talked about suspension. So the binder suspends the pigment in place. Well, not all pigment likes to stay in suspension. Chemistry or chemists refer to it as Brownian motion. So that pigment is constantly in movement inside the tube. And sometimes it's pushing away at the linseed oil and it pushes it out. It expresses it, if you will. And that's what you're seeing happening in the tube, especially in what we call young tubes of paint, so newer tubes of paint. And then as they age over time, they can even push more of that out. It's actually a sign that you have good paint. There's not a lot of additives, not a lot of stabilizers, not a lot of extra things in the paint. It's mostly just the binder and the pigment. So how do you avoid it? So the easiest way to avoid it is based on the way you store it. So in the store, it's hanging cap up, right? So that means all the oil is kind of gathering at the top. That's typically why you see it when you first squeeze it out. In the studio, if possible, you want to store it where it's capped down. And some people do this by putting a little butterfly clip on the end of the tube and hanging it. Maybe you've seen that in somebody's studio and go, why are they doing that? They do that with traditional oils too. That means that the oil then will gather at the end of the tube, and when you squeeze it out, you won't see that oil shed. A couple other things you can do. I mean, when you squeeze it out on the palette and you see it there, you can just mix it back in to the paint and get a nice creamy paint that way. Or you could slide a paper towel right up next to it, and the paper towel will absorb that excess oil. Some artists actually do a technique where they will squeeze it out on a piece of cardboard first. So they squeeze the paint out. They do this with whether they're shed or not, but you squeeze it out on the cardboard and you let it sit for a while. And the cardboard actually absorbs all the excess oil and creates a stiffer paint. And then they will use that. So that's a technique to kind of stiffen up a paint that has a lot of oil in it in terms of the ratio. So those are a couple different ways to handle it and a kind of a quick explanation of why it's happening there. Don't be alarmed. It's just the natural chemistry of oil paint happening.
Awesome.
Great question.
Yeah. So Catherine is asking, I already have some water-soluble oil paints and medium from another brand. Can I use them with the Cobra paints?
Absolutely. So the mediums and the paints are interchangeable, even the qualities. Now, some water mixable paints handle a little different than other ones. So when you start mixing them together, you'll start see those working properties mixed together. But there's nothing that would happen by mixing them together to jeopardize the quality of the paint foam or the longevity of the painting. You'll see some differences. I think Cobra is a really buttery oil paint, kind of like the Rembrandt, really fun to work with. Some of the other water mixable brands are a little stiffer. So it really depends on your preference, but yeah, you can mix them together.
Cool. She says, fantastic. Um, Lauren says, I assume that pigments that are toxic in acrylic paints, like cadmium, are toxic in these paints as well, or do these paints use non-toxic pigments?
No, you're absolutely right. So pigments are universal. We mentioned that. Cobra Artist grade does have some cadmiums and cobalt colors, just like other professional grade oil paints or professional grade acrylic paints that you mentioned. So those are pigments that you still want to be cautious. You can use them safely in your studio. You just have to use a little common sense as far as the way you're cleaning and disposing of them. They really don't present a health hazard unless you have a predisposed allergy or condition to them. It's really about not wanting those pigments to get into the groundwater. There's a whole other topic and conversation we can have about painting in general. But yes, the short answer is Cobra Artist does contain some known carcinogenic pigments like cadmiums and cobalts. The Cobra Study line does not. It's a curated line for less expensive pigments. Still a wonderful paint. So if you're looking to avoid those, easy done. There's only about 9 pigments in the 100 color range that are carcinogenic, and they are labeled with the Prop 65 label that tells you what they are. The vast majority of the colors are not, and there are some great substitute colors for the cadmium cobalt in the range if you like those hues but want to get away from them.
Great. Celia asked if there's an equivalent to the Egyptian blue in Cobra.
um, you could get close, but I am not aware of any paint that has Egyptian blue used in it still today. It's a pretty unique pigment. Um, it was originally the Egyptians referred to it as a synthetic lapis. So I would say that it most resembles ultramarine. So any kind of ultramarine blue or ultramarine blue mix, or even a cobalt or a cobalt hue would be as close as we would get in our range and probably other ranges too. But yeah, they used to, it was a much less expensive pigment than using pure lapis. And that was what kind of led them on the journey to create it, to find a substitute for lapis. So that would be my recommendation to get close to Egyptian blue.
Great. How soon can you consider a painting cured?
So oil paints, and this is all oil paints, water mixable or traditional, The typical drying period before you would varnish it, so that's when it's completely cured, is 6 to 9 months. So that's true for water mixable oils, just like it is for traditional oils. Even if you're using water in the painting process, that water evaporates really quickly. As I mentioned before, the longest it would stay would be about 72 hours. Most often it's going to evaporate during the painting session itself. But the painting film takes 6 to 9 months, depending on how thick and how many mediums you're adding to it, before it's completely cured and safe to varnish.
Great. One last question from Diane. How do you dispose of the rinse water after a painting session?
So there are different ways to do this. The most direct way is to let your paint, well, I use two buckets. So one is for cleaning, one is for mixing. So I clean my brush with one color, then I go to the mixing color or mixing water so I'm not polluting my color, right? So that cleaning bucket at the end of the session, I will let it sit overnight. And what happens is the pigments, especially the carcinogenic ones, which are metal-based, inorganic, synthetic pigments, those will settle at the bottom of the rinse bucket, the clean bucket. And then I can pour the water off and use it again if I wanted to, or you could pour it down the drain. And then that sludge in the bottom, you can wipe that out, put it into a baggie, and you can take it to your waste disposal center. Or if you want to take the time, you can leave it out. Acrylic, this is easier with. Acrylic will dry in a few days, and you can just take that piece of acrylic plastic out of the bottom of the jug and throw it away. With oils, of course, it's a much longer drying period, so people typically will rinse that out and put it in a baggie or some kind of a container that they can take to the waste disposal area.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, there's some great, if you look that up online, there's some great examples and some videos. Rural Talens has one at their website. Most oil paint manufacturers today have some type of video or recommendation on the disposal of carcinogenic pigments and solvents.
Great. Lauren's actually asking, she uses the golden crash system for her
Yeah, that's a
acrylics.
really good one
Can you
for
use that
acrylics.
for Cobra?
It's I would not, I would check with Golden. I would check with Golden on that. My only concern is we have a different binder here, right? So they created a system that's specific for the acrylic polymer emulsion that's used to make the acrylic paint. I do not know that linseed oil would filter in the same way. In principle, it seems like it would make sense, but I would reach out to Golden about that system. That's an excellent system to use to get the pigment, not only the pigments, but the microplastics out as well.
Great. Thank you.
You bet.
All set on questions for now.
I mean, Golden is now the owner and distributor of Williamsburg Oil Paint, so I'm sure somebody's asked them that question.
Yep, definitely. Okay.
We ready for demo time?
I think so.
All right. I will share my screen. So what I've done is I pre-recorded it, and then I'm going to talk over. I'm going that way I could edit out all the funky stuff and you could just see the good stuff. So let me share my screen and you can see that okay?
Yep, looks good.
All right, here we go. Here's the materials I'm using today. So again, you can use the ones in the sample kit and there's our board. To begin with, I want to show you what I said, mixing with a traditional oil and kind of explore the water miscibility. So here I have Rembrandt oil, which is a traditional oil paint. Going to squeeze some of that out. Just got a paper palette here. Any palette will work. I'm going to set that aside. So here I have the Cobra. This is the same color in the Cobra. You can see this, the symbols we talked about in reading the tube there. Excellent light fastness, same color number. The opacity there's semi-opaque. I'm going to squeeze some of that out. You can see a little bit of oil there. All right. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we put water into traditional oil paint. Not a lot. So I'm smearing the paint around with my brush, but you can see the water's just beating up. It's not mixing with the paint at all. I can add more, doesn't make a difference. I can push the paint around, but the water itself doesn't mix. And you can see it just kind of run off with no color in it. So water does not mix with traditional oil paint. Big discovery there, right? So now let's go ahead and see what happens. I'm using that same brush with a little bit of the Rembrandt in it still. I'm trying to clean it off, and look, it doesn't come off at all, not even in my rinse water. So the paint will not disperse in water at all. So now let's add a little water to the Cobra and see the difference here. And you can see almost immediately how the water starts to synthesize, emulsify with the paint itself, and we get a nice thin, lean layer of paint there. And you can see how when that drips down, we got lots of color. There's a little bit of the water from before. So a big difference, easily mixed with water. Now here, when I go to clean my brush with the Cobra, you also see a big difference, how easily it comes out into the water, able to clean my brush. So the water mixability of the paint is excellent. Don't have to fight it, which is a real nice feature. So let's see now if we can use some of the Rembrandt. Put a little bit of Rembrandt, and now 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to use twice as much Cobra to half as much Rembrandt. And I want to mix them really good. Mix them together now. So this is the Cobra 2-to-1. So the recommendation is 4-to-1, but as I've said, I've been able to push it. All depends on the color. Some paints are leaner than others, meaning they have a different ratio of pigment to binder. So 4-to-1 is the safest. So let's see now if I can mix this combination with water. And sure enough, there's enough emulsifier in the Cobra that I can take this mixture now. So this is a great way to integrate your traditional oil with your water mixable oil. Say there's a color that you really love in gambling that doesn't come in the Cobra. You can still mix that color into it just using the paint itself. All right, so let's look at the handling comparison of the paint. Going to use a different color here, the green. You can use your blue, any of the colors that you want for this. And we're going to look at how the paint handles right out of the tube, mixed with water, and then also using the two mediums. Squeeze a little of the paint out of the tube. Here's my Princeton brush. I'm using a filbert. Number 6, I think we had number 8 on the list. Both work fine. Whatever size brush you have, or even if it's not a filbert, if it's a flat or a bright, that works fine too. All right, so this is just the Cobra straight out of the tube. No water added to it. My brush was not wet. It was dry. You could see it as I was kind of flicking it off in my hand there, looking at the bristles. You can see the paint loaded up there. No water, no medium, a nice buttery, creamy oil paint. Those fun brush strokes and smooth surface of the gesso board allows me to really pull the color. If this was a canvas, it would probably run out of paint a little bit quicker. But there you can see the handling of the paint. Nice brush strokes. Start to get some broken color of the edges as the paint starts to run out of the brush. All right, so now I'm going to get some water on my brush. I'm going to mix that right into that same paint. I'm just using a brush here. You could mix it with the palette knife and get a better consistency more easily, but I'm just mixing it with the brush here. And make sure I get it all mixed up together there, get a nice consistency of paint. And now let's see what it looks like with the water on it. You can see how the paint flows more easily. It's a little leaner, a little more transparent with the water in it. Doesn't have the same broken color at the edges, so I'm able to push a little more paint. You can also see that the finish is a little bit different, and we'll look at it again at all of them at the end here. So now I'm going to use the painting medium. I'm going to mix about a 1-to-1 ratio. Got them any ratio you can do with this. Water's the only one you got to mind, that 1-to-1. So I'm going to mix them together. You can kind of see how I like to tease it off the edge there. Don't try to mix the whole group together. It's a real pigment hungry medium. Doesn't take a lot of effort to get the paint to mix in there. All right, that looks good. Nice fluid paint. You can see it's a little shinier. The painting medium adds gloss. This is going to be a little more self-leveling, and it really brushes on nicely. It really makes the paint a pleasure to work with by adding that. Look at the fun marks there. The brush strokes leveled out a little bit. I still have some sense of it. You could decrease that by adding more medium. A little better color than just with the water, more vibrant. I like that. All right, let's do the painting paste, my favorite here. Literally, think of it as paint without pigment. It has the same consistency as the paint. And I'm going to do equal portions of it. This is a great way to extend your paint. It does make the color a little more transparent, but not a lot, as you'll see. So I'm just using my brush. You could use the palette knife to mix this up too. This is a great way to do palette knife techniques. It just absorbs that color almost immediately. So now I have twice as much paint as I did before. And the painting paste is half as much of the paint itself. So here you can see how much stiffer it made it. Look at that. But it brushes out easier than the paint by itself. So it loosens the paint up a little bit, but still gives you that wonderful texture. Look at the brush strokes there. Great brush strokes with oil paint. So we can kind of see them all together. You can see the paint itself. The water mixture is already kind of started tacking up there as the water's evaporating out. And then, of course, the slower drying ones with the medium added. But look at the sheen on the one with the painting medium. But the sheen on the one with the painting paste is about the same as the paint itself. A little more transparent. You can see some more transparency in it, but still great texture. So there's the different comparisons of the handling. So now let's do some basic oil painting techniques, blending, layering, some expressive brushwork here. I'm going to use the Naples yellow, and I've got this fun permanent red violet. You've got the primary magenta. Any two color combinations here are fine. Just want to use two colors so we can do some blending together. So I'm adding a little water into the paint for this first one. So I'm just going to use paint and water in this first example. Mixing it in with my brush. Same brush I'm using here as I was before. On the gesso board surface, I've taped it up. You don't have to tape it up. I'm just OCD. I like to have the sharp edge there. And I'm doing a nice light scumbling brush technique here. This is a fun technique with oil paint. Oil paint has that beautiful feel and texture to it. You can see the brush strokes. Because I'm thinning with water, the paint is a little more transparent. Now I'm going to go down and get some of this wonderful violet. You can see when the water is added to it, you get a little milky look at it at first. That's the emulsion process, but that quickly clears up as you start painting. You can see there already it's now almost the same color as the paint out of the tube. Now see how I just layered that layer on there. This is oil paint, but I'm getting a good coverage. There's a little bit of wet into wet blending, but I'm able to pull that paint right over the top of the paint I just laid down. So that's one of the advantages of working with the water. Look at the brush strokes over the top there. Now I'm going to mix a combination of these two colors together with just water, no painting medium. And then I'm just going to do a transition color here so we have a blend. Not a smooth blend. This is a kind of an expressive brush stroke. How you might quickly scumble color on with your oil paint so you can see how the paint handles with water. Brushes on nice, it's thin, lean layers. So this is excellent for those first layers of your painting. You still have to follow the fat over lean practice with water mixable oil paints. That doesn't change. So if you're building up layers. There, nice little transition. Fun brush strokes. This is just using water with the paint. All right, in this next square, we're going to try same thing, same colors, but I'm going to use the painting medium instead of water. So no water added this time, just painting medium. I'm going to pour a little bit in my little ramekin here. You can see relatively clear when it's not in the bottle. Get a little bit on my brush, not a lot. This is how I typically will use it, just enough on my brush to mix into the paint till I get the consistency that I want. You can see how it thins the paint out, makes it a little glossier. Super fun to push around on the surface. So where the paint with the water drags a little bit, no drag here at all. Really loose brushwork. Get a close-up look there. Difference in the way the brush stroke looks with the medium compared to the water too. More intense color this way. Doing some medium now into this fun violet, red violet. Now what you'll see here a little different than I had with the water is I'm mixing into that yellow, a little more of the wet into wet technique. See the yellow grab there? So these are blending together on the surface directly, but still getting some nice carryover, nice brush strokes, good color. Wet into wet. All these techniques are wet into wet techniques. So alla prima. So now I'm mixing again with the medium to do a transition color. You see the wet into wet techniques, bold brush marks, but a different look and feel to the brush stroke because of the addition of the medium compared to the water. Gonna see it when I compare them together. Look at those fun marks. Same brush, different medium in the paint, different look to the brush strokes. Fun, vibrant color too. These are true oil paints. Beautiful, beautiful color. So there's the water. You can see how it's kind of matte on the surface. With the medium, it's much glossier, much shinier. All right. Squeeze out some more color. Now I'm going to use the painting paste. All right, going to mix that in. Oh, little autofocus dancing around there. You needed that close-up of my thumb, I could tell. All right, look at the paint consistency. Real rich impasto. Really fun to push this thicker paint around. And can't wait for you to see the brush strokes. And do it yourself too. This is just a fun technique. So you can see the ridges of the brush there. They don't go away. There's no leveling of the brush stroke like you saw with the water or with the painting medium. Every bristle is leaving its fingerprint, if you will, on the surface there. Real vibrant. Captures the light in a fun way. Texture does. Look at how quickly the pigment gets absorbed into the medium. You know, it does make the paint more transparent, but not a lot. You can add a lot of this paste and still have some good color. You can see it on the surface there. A little wet into wet blending at the edge there. But a much stiffer paint. And a short, choppy brush stroke as a result that you're able to achieve. Now mixing that secondary color. Mix those brush strokes in, and again, maintains the brush stroke. Nice, fun feel, surface, dance of paint. Love oil paint for this reason, such a buttery consistency. Look at that texture. That is super nice. Love the way the paint quality is. Now kind of look back over all three of them. You can see the difference in the handling of the paint. All right, now let's do a little layering. So I'm going to use some water. And this is more how you would build a painting, right? So I'm adding water, creating that lean layer of paint, just like I did in that first example there. And now I'm going to fill in this whole area. Just a quick kind of scumble of color on the surface. And because I'm adding a lot of water to it, good one-to-one, and it's starts to tack up pretty quickly. Kind of a fun surface. Now I'm just using paint straight out of the tube, nothing added to this paint. Nice buttery paint. And I'm just going to lay some marks down, and you'll see how easily I can layer the paint. So now I'm doing a little fatter paint, the paint straight out of the tube, and the leaner level below. And literally within seconds, not even a minute, I'm mixing that other color. I can layer over the top of that really easily. Keep making some more marks here. Try the brush, different angles. Still getting nice color. I could push it in there harder. This is a light touch, and get more wet into wet mixing. But I just wanted to show you how easy it is to layer these colors. So putting that fatter or thicker paint in this case too over the leaner, thinner paint. Kind of look at them all together again. There is the paste, there is the painting medium. The shine of that painting medium just adds a lot of gloss, a lot of punch to the color, glows. And there's just water throughout. Kind of look at these all closely again. There's my brush strokes. So that's the paint out of the tube. There's paint with water, paint with painting medium. Just fun to see the look as the light is captured by the brush strokes on some of these. Now I'm going to add a little paste back into that yellow. So that's the yellow I mixed with water. So the paste will mix with water just fine too. All the mediums do. So I'm going to make a little stiffer, more transparent yellow. So this is a fatter layer, and I'm going to go ahead and brush some of that over the top. So you can see the transparency there, but also getting more wet into wet mixing. So I'm mixing into that paint straight from the tube now with some paint with medium to it, which is another fatter layer. Get a little bit more paint on there. Gonna see how I'm light touch, still able to layer the paint nicely. A little wet into wet mixing. Kind of practicing fat over lean here. Fun to put that lighter color back in. And there they all are in comparison. So the different handling techniques, layering, brush strokes, really a wonderful creamy, buttery paint to work with, Cobra. And there, remove the tape. Kind of give you the finished look at the demo board. Fun to see those brush strokes. That's the paint mixed with water. Paint mixed with the painting medium. Really love the movement in that. There's the paint mixed with the painting paste. Wonderful texture. And then here was layering. Paint with water on the bottom, the lean layer, and then paint out of the tube, and then finally some paint with the painting paste. And here, move it around a little bit so you can see the light dance off that surface. The different layers there, capturing light differently. There, the sheen from the painting medium making the paint glossier. And there, the paint with just some water added. Fun results. I just love the dance of light on these colors. Take a look at this again. There you get a better sense of how much glossier the painting medium is compared to the paint out. And look at that painting paste, the ridges of the brush strokes, so much more defined than with the others. And the paint out of the tube's got nice texture too. All right, you guys.
Nice.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, we did have some people more curious about the medium mix. I don't
Yeah.
know if you're able to demonstrate that or have any resources
I
for,
don't have any mix with me, but it's really
yeah, yeah.
easy to use. So the way I would describe it is you put your paint out first, just like I did in the demonstration with the other mediums. Then with my mix in a little ramekin, I would add small amounts with my brush, going up to as much as a 1-to-1 ratio. So equal parts mix is the most that you want to add. But just a little bit on your brush at a time, add it into the paint, mix it with a palette knife or your brush together until you get the consistency you want. Different colors are either leaner or fatter in the tube themselves. So there's no one measurement that fits all colors. Um, Maybe you've learned this before, maybe this is the first time you're hearing that, but we don't make every color with the same ratio of pigment and binder. Some pigments are really like a lot of binder and absorb a lot of it. And there are other types of pigments who really resist it. So it's more binder than it is pigment in the tube. So you kind of have to experiment with the medium mix till you get the right ratio and make it as water miscible as you want it to be. That would be a great another demo. We could do that as an example, but that would be a fun thing. I did put
Yeah,
together a short demo that's only about 2 minutes. I don't know if we have enough time for it, but I mentioned the
yeah.
tempera grassa technique of mixing the egg yolk with the oil, how they used to do it early century. I actually wanted to test it out, right? And I wanted to mix some egg yolk with some oil paint to see if it worked. Would you guys like to see that? All right.
Yes,
So,
we
hey,
see
all
some
right.
nods. Thumbs
Yes.
up.
Thumbs up. All right, let me go back. It's just a couple minutes long. Let me bring that video up here and I'll show you my little video testing out the tempra grassa. So this is a really quick, short video. I'm gonna have to put it online. So here, just like our forefathers back in the 15th century, tempra grassa or fat tempra. All right, so I've got some egg yolk. I have some traditional oil here, the Rembrandt palette knife brush and some water. So I'm using light oxide red, one of the most popular colors of the Renaissance. Here's my egg yolk. Now you separate the egg yolk from the white and then you uh, squeeze out the yolk from the sac too. You just want the yolk. There's my brush and of course my water. Now we're going to see if this works, right? So squeeze a little of the oil paint out onto the surface of my palette paper. My nice buttery oil paint there. I've got some egg yolk here. I pour some of that out onto the palette paper as well. So this is something you can try at home. I don't have a recipe. I'm just kind of playing around with it directly. Put a little egg yolk down there. Mix in the traditional oil. And then you kind of want to mix it to the consistency you want. It is going to kind of like adding medium to the paint. It's going to make it more fluid. If you get a kind of sticky, pasty result, that means you need more egg yolk. Remember that recipe from Frederick Tubbs was 1 part oil to 2 parts egg yolk. So he had twice as much egg yolk before he added the water. So there's my oil paint. Now here we go. Here's the test. Gonna see if I can add water to the paint. You remember what happened before, and there we go. Magic. So there's enough emulsifier in the egg yolk itself that allows me to now mix the oil paint with water as the vehicle. Tempera grassa. Kind of beads up on my palette paper, but it would be just like painting with an oil paint. But I can use water now, making your own water mixable oil paint there. But why go to all that trouble? It's a lot of eggs when you can just buy Cobra. And you can see there, it even cleans off my brush a little bit. I'm getting some of the paint into the mix, and now I'm going right back with a lot of water back into the paint, and it's still mixing with the paint. Super fun. Had to give that a try. Something you can try at home. All right.
Awesome.
Tempura grassa.
We are getting a couple other questions. I don't know if you have a couple extra minutes
Oh
or
yeah, I can, as
okay.
long as you guys are willing to hang with me, I'm here.
Okay, we'll do a few and then if you have contact, do you have any contact info if people need to follow up about anything for Cobra?
Absolutely. I will put my email
Okay,
in the comments here.
great. So once you get that in, we'll ask a couple of these that we can get through.
All right, there is my email. Happy to answer
Thanks.
any questions or comments you have about Cobra or any art material questions. Happy to field those as well.
Awesome. Brennan, looks like was sampling the paints and using them that on the tacky paint and then watery paint is pulling the old layer. Is that danger still once the paint dries? So I guess adding a watery layer over top of a tacky layer, once
Yeah,
the paint
so
dries,
you
is it
yeah,
still a
so
risk?
yeah, so you want to put the watery layer down first, and then the paint with medium or paint straight from the tube on second, not the other way around. If you put down let's say you have some paint mixed with the painting medium on the surface, and then mix some paint with water and try to brush over that, you're going to get a reaction to it. It's not going to have that smooth thing. You can do it and mix it in, but think about traditional oil techniques. So if you are painting with oil paint just out of the tube, and then you mix some paint with a solvent and try to brush into it, there's kind of a resistance at first, and they kind of got to push it around and get it to blend together. Same thing's happening here. So the layering to get the best result would start with the lean layer first, or the traditional oil with a solvent, or Cobra with water first, and then put those other layers over the top of it. And now the amount of water you mix with the paint is going to affect also how quickly it tacks up. I was doing a pretty generous portion of water there on that first layer, so it's going to tack up a little bit quicker than, say, if I had just used a little bit of water on my brush and the paint. So those things, those variations in ratio will change the feel of the paint, both with water mixed into the paint or mediums mixed into the paint. That's why moderation is really best in the beginning, even with the water. I always recommend to people who are trying water mixable oils for the first time just to use them like you would your traditional oil paint. Don't even worry about the water yet. Brush them on the surface, mix them with your traditional oil, see how it feels, if you even like it, right? And if you like the way it feels, then you can start experimenting with adding water and adding other mediums to it to create the variety of effects and feels.
Awesome. One more question I think we have a couple minutes left for is if you use the painting medium and don't like it, what is the best way to paint over it and bring other colors in, adding a color with paste?
So if you don't like the way that it looks like the painting medium, I would just wipe it off or scrape it off and then paint another layer back into it. Now, if you've applied that over some other layers of painting that you've worked into, you can brush over like some of the paint right out of the tube back into that. You can brush over it with some of the paste back into it. So you can build layers. Just always keep that fat over lean in mind. And what, if you're not familiar with that term, the quickest way to explain it is kind of think of cooking and oil content. So when somebody says a paint is fat, they are saying that it has a lot of oil content. If they're saying a paint is lean, it has lower or less oil content. When we mix a solvent with oil paint or water with water mixable oil paint, we're making the paint leaner because we're changing the ratio, right, of the oil content. We're reducing it. That mixture of paint now has less oil. So that's a leaner paint. If we add a medium to it, which has additional oil, like the painting medium or many of the traditional painting mediums are also made with linseed oil. When you add those oils to the paint, you're increasing the oil content, so you're making the paint fatter. When you're painting alla prima, which is all at once, which is how most plein air painters paint, which is how 80% of oil painters paint, where it's kind of all at once is what it means in Italian, alla prima. When you're painting all at once, you don't really have to worry about layering because you're painting directly into wet and wet surfaces. So you don't have to worry about it as much. But if you're Van Eyck and you want to build those wonderful layers of color, those glazes that we call them, you have to wait for each layer to dry before you put on the next layer. When a paint has a high oil content, that means it takes longer to dry. It's slower drying. When a paint is leaner or has a lower oil content, it dries more rapidly. So what the rule is, fat over lean, is if you're painting one layer over another, you want to allow the lower layers to be able to dry before the other layer does, so it doesn't seal it off from oxidizing. Remember, it's absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere. So that's what they mean when they're painting fat over lean. You only really need to worry about it when you're doing those complex types of layering and glazing. If you're painting alla prima, wet into wet techniques, which most of us are doing, you don't have to worry about it. That means you can kind of go back and forth with some of these mediums and some of these applications and explore more. So hopefully I didn't, confuse it too much by explaining that. But there are a lot of great resources that explain fat over lean. But just think of oil content when you hear that term, and it only applies to layering processes.
Awesome. Great. We are out of time. I know that there are some other questions we didn't get to, but Jeffrey did add his email address, j.olson@royaltalens.com. So please feel free to reach out to him. If you can reach out, we'll send an email of the recording, and you can always reach out to us if you need any help with getting in touch with any answers. So we appreciate you all coming. Thank you, Jeff. This was really great and fun to watch and to learn about these paints. Hope to see you again. And I think this was really great. Everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Um,
everybody. Super glad. Thanks for joining and thanks for making the opportunity possible, Lauren. I really appreciate being here.
yeah, great. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. See you on the next one, hopefully.
Take care, everybody. Good luck painting.